Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Cook With Me Live. So good to have you online tonight. And for those of you, I know we've got a fair few of you that are trying this for the very first time tonight. So hello, challenge members. And thank you very much to the Whole Food Collective for all that you're doing for these wonderful people in helping you guys understand whole foods. So welcome to you guys. Welcome to my regulars who are doing lots of Cook With Me living. Whether you're just watching tonight or whether you're going to be cooking with me, I'd love for you to let me know in the little comment box there. And also would love to have your questions through tonight, okay? Sometimes I'll probably get to some things eventually, but if you know that I forgot to say something or you really need clarity on the next step forward, then this is your chance and opportunity to type that in while we're live, while we can take full advantage of this fact and hopefully feel like we're kind of in the kitchen together cooking beside each other. That is the whole amazing thing about Cook With Me Live, that I'm trying really hard to be able to interact with you guys and really keep this real, valid, okay? Useful in your kitchen. Everything that I do is about practicality. So there's a few little tricks and tips that I'm going to teach you tonight, and one very big skill, okay guys? This is a pretty big giveaway, this one, in terms of how to sprout your own beans, legumes, whichever you're going to choose, grains even. How are you going to sprout these little things so that you can get the maximum amount of nutrition out of your food, especially the maximum amount of nutrition per calorie eaten and per cost spent. So huge information I want to give you on that. So what we're going to do tonight, hello and welcome everyone who's coming on. Give me a little wave, a little hello. And guys, it's especially dear to my heart. If you've got kids in the kitchen with you tonight, can you please let me know that they're cooking with you tonight? Hopefully I can kind of customize things depending on their ages a little bit. But that's a very important thing to me, is to be able to teach kids how to cook and have them in the kitchen with you. So would love to know who's online and watching for that as well. So sprouted splats. I thought it was a bit of a catchy name, and the way they kind of go in the pan, well, they're called splats. So other names for this could be falafel, but it's going to be obviously the Ashley version of falafel. Traditionally, the way falafel's made doesn't necessarily have to be sprouted. So I tend to find that some falafels can aggravate my belly a bit, and I've heard that kind of comment from a few people when it comes to lentils and or chickpeas and or beans in general. So the reason why we're taking that little bit of extra effort to sprout them is to hopefully make them a ton more digestible and not only tastier, but a lot better on your digestive system, not to mention a lot more nutritious as well. Okay, so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to actually make the splats first, and then after that I'm going to show you how we do the sprouting so that you can get that kind of further detail for next time. So if you are cooking with me live tonight, you've probably already got yours sprouted. We're going to make them first, and then if you're done with that and you've already figured out the sprouting, you're welcome to go on and enjoy your splats, and otherwise I'm going to go into the detail on how we actually make those sprouts. It's much easier than you think, I promise you. Okay, so you guys ready to go? Give me a little nod, let me know. You ready to get cooking in the kitchen? Tonight you're gonna need a food processor. Doesn't have to be a fandangle one. We just need a food processor so that we can mulch everything up. Technically speaking, you could do this by hand as well, okay? So if you do have some sort of kids that are like 9 and up, you could get them in there and let them have a real good time with some cleaned hands on doing a bit of a mash themselves with the hands. You could get in there with the potato masher. It's totally doable by hand as well, okay? With this slight exception of if your flax meal is not already mealed, then we'll need to meal that up, okay? So you'll need to have a nice meal of that. And also you'll need to then chop up your herbs and things quite fine if you're gonna do it by hand. Otherwise, we're gonna let the machine do the work. I'm a big fan of that. Okay, so we're gonna need a food processor. You're also gonna need a frying pan eventually. And if you're like me and you wanna do things the most efficient way possible, you're gonna get 2 frying pans going at once so that you can minimize your time doing it. You're gonna be standing there anyways, you might as well get 2 frying pans going at once. But that might blow some people's minds, so that's okay. Just 1 frying pan's okay as well. Okay, you guys good? Let's do it. Now, sprouted chickpeas. Again, I'm gonna show you the details after, but this is a bit of a clue here as to how this is all gonna happen. So I'll just show you this one quickly. This is now the result of our sprouting chickpeas. So I don't know if you can see that clearly through the camera, but they've got these nice little tails that they've grown, which are the sprouts. Okay, and I've just got this makeshift thing kind of set up in my kitchen. If you've got handle doors above a bench space, that's the perfect way to sprout your, well, anything you're sprouting. And even if you don't live in Queensland, that's fine, but I tend to find that sprouting them in a bag is a lot more successful than even any of the fancy sprouting dishes or sprouting trays or jars. I've tried them all. If you live in a very dry climate, then that might be more suitable. But whenever there's a high level of humidity, I find the bag is the most foolproof and the easiest to do. So I'm going to get back to that detail after we actually make our splats, but this is what we need to make them. And I think it's pretty cool that we don't actually have to cook them from here. I mean, they're going to get cooked in the frying pan, but the goal there is not, we're not going to be boiling them. We're just going to kind of cook sort of through so that they're warm, essentially. We don't actually have to cook them for food safety reasons, right? So that's a big differentiator. Okay, so there's our beautiful little sprouted chickpeas. How cool is that? I don't know about you guys, but I think nature is pretty darn amazing. And the fact that we can turn a rock hard chickpea in 2 days into a new plant, I think is pretty amazing. Not to mention what's actually happening on the inside of this little chickpea. All right, so we're gonna need 2.5 cups of those guys. So if you're not already with me on that one, let's get out our measuring cup and into the food processor straight away. We're just gonna start adding our ingredients. So roughly 2.5 cups. Now, if you've soaked 1.5 cups of chickpeas, it should be all of that, okay? I wasn't really thinking when I soaked them, and I soaked 2 cups of dry chickpeas, so I'm gonna have a bit extra here. But that should be my 2.5 cups. Just gonna put a little bit extra in, because then I'll have to make some more splats tomorrow, clearly. But that's okay. The other thing you can do is you can now eat these raw, essentially. So now they do not need to be cooked. These are now kind of edible little sprouts. So you might just like the nice little crunchiness to them, and you could just sprinkle them on salads, have them like warmed up in the morning with a little bit of your breakfast warm, like a fry up, sort of a bit of kale, a bit of mushrooms, that kind of thing. So they're definitely good to eat like that as well. Okay, so we've got our 2.5 cups into the food processor. Now we're gonna add another bean. Now, you wouldn't have to do this, like you could just add the extra amount of chickpeas, but I find flavor-wise and texture-wise, at least initially, it's kind of a good way to introduce this. It just works a little bit better for some people. Up to you. So either use the extra 1 tin's worth of your sprouted chickpeas, or you can add some beans. Now this is the option, and this is maybe for those of you that have been watching a few of these and you're starting to get the hang of things and you're starting to get the hang of efficiency tricks, then this is I guess the epitome of what we're aiming towards. So this is something I just pulled out of the freezer a little while ago. Okay, you can still see the little icicles on there. So these have been soaked and pre-activated, and these are little black-eyed peas. So the reason why they're called peas and not beans, I don't know, but there's a pretty gray line between the pea and the bean. So these little black-eyed peas are my favorite bean. Pea. Whatever if you're gonna start out with beans in your diet, you're gonna try them for the first time, you're gonna try cooking them from dry and then making your own rather than buying in the tin, I would start with black-eyed peas. They're so nice, they're delicious, and they cook really quickly compared to all the other beans, which is maybe why they're peas and not beans. Anyways, so this is another option instead of the tin of beans. If you've got them already cooked and you had them in the freezer, then we could then put them into the food processor a little bit thawed and include that instead. Okay, so I might try to do some of that with these guys because I absolutely love these black-eyed peas. The texture and the flavor is just, it's something you kind of just have to taste. Especially if you're not a bean lover, you probably will like these. It's quite mild and quite easy to enjoy, not to mention the rapidity of how quickly it cooks, I think is pretty cool. Okay, so this might be a little bit frozen to use, but I'm gonna trust this machine can do it. And 1 tin's worth is gonna be about a cup. Okay, you could get a little bit more than that, but we'll aim for a cup, maybe 1.25 cups approximately. And at the end of the day, it's very nice when you're working with savory recipes because the measurements aren't as critical as if we're baking. So if you're going a little bit over, a little bit under, it should be okay, as long as we end up with sort of the right texture before we hit the frying pan. Okay, let's see how much we get out of here. There we go, that's a bit easier. Okay, and another little trick when you're freezing them, ideally, like this is kind of normally 1 portion size, which is why I did that. But if you're freezing it in a bigger amount and you've got like a thinner container, a big thin container, I'd recommend freezing pretty much anything thin so that you can break it apart really easily as well. How are you guys going? Are you? Hello, Jody. Welcome. Awesome. Glad to see you online. And Stacy and Steph and Lexi, thanks guys. Are you guys cooking tonight with me or you're just watching? Oh, Steph, you are cooking. Good. Thank you for letting me know. Very cool. I'll try to keep up to you, Steph, and not talk too much. Okay. So we've got our extra beans in there. If you're using this one, drain off the liquid first, then put it in. Okay. And then the rest of the ingredients, guys, it's pretty much going to be pretty straightforward as far as adding everything else to the mix. Forgot my tea towel today. Into the loop. Okay, so a bit of parsley. You could do coriander, you could do chives, whatever tickles your fancy or your palate. And then you can customize it. So the next time you go to make this, you might try a different flavor altogether. So I'm going to let the machine do most of the work. We're just going to chop this up a very little bit so as to not get some big stalks left from it. I've called for about a cup fresh, so if you were to kind of pack this into a cup, you know, it's pretty estimate, but there's our cup of fresh. Okay, and if you don't have any fresh, then you can put in some dried herbs of your choice. In the amounts though, you'd probably only be putting in sort of a total of maybe a tablespoon of dried herbs. Okay, and in that case you could do basil. You could try, if you've got parsley, chives, maybe a little bit less if you're using an all-purpose herb mix. Okay, then our tahini and our flax meal. Now, the tahini is pretty important for binding, okay, so to hold this thing together and give it the right texture. So we're gonna need about 1/4 cup of tahini, and you can see that I kind of refill my jar. I buy it by the bucket. From the Whole Food Collective, actually. They've got this beautiful buckets of 2 kilos of tahini and almond butter and all these things. So that's how I buy it, best value. And then you just restock the jar in the fridge. Okay, so we've got our tahini, approximately 1/4 cup. And then we're gonna need roughly the same amount in our flax meal and our lemon. Okay, now, the other reason for the tahini, those of you guys who have been working with me already, pop quiz. What is the main nutritional benefit that we're getting from the tahini? I'll give you guys a second to kind of have a think about that one and maybe type in an answer. And then we'll come back to that. And then the flax meal, okay, is also one of our main ingredients that's going to act to bind and hold everything together. So that one's pretty important as well. If you didn't have the flax meal or couldn't have the flax meal, you could probably get creative and try chia seeds instead, but you'd be putting in maybe not quite half as much, a little bit more than half as much of that. So a little bit more than 1/8 cup of your chia seeds instead. Now, this is a nice juicy lemon, so hopefully we'll get our 1/4 cup of lemon out of this. Good job, Lexi. It is calcium. Definitely, you've been listening. That's awesome. So yes, calcium is the tahini strength, I guess. So the reason why we're also incorporating that tahini is so you get the extra boost of calcium. Good job. Bonus points. Good, Sam, you got it too. Hello, Sam, long time no see. And hi, Julie, welcome back. Samara, hello, thanks for watching. And Jody, welcome. Very cool. Thanks, ladies. Awesome. And I'm curious, who's had their own falafels before? Have you guys made them or you've just tasted them? Would love to know that, and whether or not you already love them or you're not so sure because of past experiences. For me, I wasn't very sure if I could ever handle them because I got kind of some stomach discomfort from them, but since sprouting the chickpeas, it hasn't been an issue. Okay, so some people might like it quite lemony, and you could then put a little bit more in. If you find that your splats are a bit too splatty, then you'll just have to add a little bit more flax meal, which is the drying ingredient. So let's do the 1/4 cup of lemon juice. Extra lemon juice, guys, keep it in a jar. It's already done, ready to go in the fridge. Then you have it for the next day or two. You could also then put it into a hot cuppa with a little bit of honey, and that will be very alkalizing for your gut as well. Okay, 1 onion. Now, that's maybe a bit big, but if you love your onion, you can do that. Okay, I might not quite put all of that in. It's quite a big onion. And if I don't cut it quickly here, I'm going to end up crying for everyone. So we'll try and do this as quickly as we can. Okay, red onion, yellow onion, whatever you've got. I actually quite like white onion, even though it's not super traditional. You guys know me probably already. I'm not super traditional anyways. I like bending rules and getting creative and having fun. How are we going? Okay, so Steph, you've made them and you've loved them. Store-bought ones are really dry. I totally agree. Yeah, definitely. Homemade is just the where it's at. Sam, I love the ones from the markets. Yum, but never made your own. Cool. So Sam, are you cooking with me tonight, or are you just watching and then getting ready to cook them another time? Either way, all good. So we've got our onion in there. You guys might have noticed, sometimes I see people chop things up really tiny before they put it into a food processor. So all I did was kind of, I guess, quarter it. Or I guess maybe that's quartering the halves, so eighthing. Oh, you guys, you'll get to know the engineer eventually. Anyways, you don't have to do all the work before you let the machine do the work, is the moral of that story. So 4 cloves of garlic. Now, if you're not a huge garlic lover, you can put a little bit less in. This, again, this type of dish traditionally is very, very garlicky. That being said, once we cook it and we make them in the frying pan, then it's gonna tame down a little bit. But it's nice if this is kind of one of the main flavors that comes through. So remember our trick when it comes to garlic, top and tail as little as you can, and then we crush before we peel. Just makes it so much easier to do, okay? So crush and peel. And should fall off if we created a break. There we go, okay? So normally we'd crush all, peel away. If you haven't got fresh garlic, that's okay. You can use a dried form of garlic, but it will taste different. So just as a bit of an FYI, just because it's still called the same thing, it can still produce pretty different results, which you might prefer the dried one. So that's something you can try and test, okay? And so just for the sake of not wanting to get huge chunks of garlic in this, in case the machine doesn't quite get it as fine, I'm just gonna break it up a little bit. Okay, not doing all the work by any means. And then we'll just put in the pieces rather than the big cloves. Okay, so straight in. There we go. And then next up, our spices. Now, this is where life gets fun, guys. When you start to spice up your life and figure out how to do this, it's quite, I think, a way for us boring old adults to be able to have a bit of fun in the kitchen space. Is in spices. Now, I'll say that, but if you're still working with kind of the little supermarket versions that have potentially been on the shelf for quite a while before you even get it, and then you get them, and now we're like 5-10 years later and you still got the same spice collection. Been there, done that, guys. I've been into many pantries, flipped many pantries, and quite regularly, I'm not kidding you, quite regularly we find a spice jar from the 80s. One time we found one from the 70s, that's our record. So just so you know, the fresher the spices, the better they taste and the more excited you're gonna be about your food. Okay, so if you make this recipe and you are using, you think they might be fairly old spices, and you kind of make this and you go, oh, it's kind of lacking a bit of flavor, chances are with this type of dish, it's your spices. Okay, so maybe you could refresh. I mean, and even look at the colors of these. Like, I don't know if it's going to show up on camera, but come see this. Look at the colors in these spices, okay? Like, I just think that that's such a beautiful palette of different colors. So you can kind of tell by color too how fresh they are. And look, again, this is exactly something that you can be buying from, you can be ordering it online, fresh. Just if ever you're not sure, you can inquire how fresh their bulk spices are, okay? So we want roughly 2 teaspoons of our coriander, our cumin, and our sweet paprika, okay? So let's get those in. If you love your spices, they can be heaped teaspoons. If not, we're gonna go level. Level's the technically proper measurement. Gotta love my cumin. Okay, and the other really important thing to note, guys, is when you get fresh spices and we're using this kind of quantity, you are gonna be getting some pretty significant health benefits from these spices as well. So do not think that we're just adding them for flavor, okay? There's a much more concentrated effect, also as indicated by the concentrated flavor that we have, okay? Now, I did end up having enough fresh garlic, so I don't need to add the powdered garlic. And with the smoked paprika, You can smell that it's quite smoky, okay? So if you guys haven't got smell-o-vision happening there because you're just watching, then you can take my word for it. So up to you. I've called for about half a teaspoon. I personally like a little bit more, but I realize that some people's palates really detect that kind of smokiness. So I'm going to put a little bit more, it's probably about 3/4 of a teaspoon of smoked paprika. Okay. And then we definitely do need some good quality salt. So maybe about 1.5 teaspoons or so. If you like it fairly flavorful, you might go 2 teaspoons. Okay, so we'll just do that guy. Now, I just want to bring this up because I see some people do this. So they've got their spoon in their salt, or they take out a spoon to measure it without having a proper measuring spoon. And you can see the difference. So some people would scoop that and go, oh yeah, that's about 1 teaspoon. Okay, just to put into perspective, that is 1 teaspoon. So do you think that this is going to be the same? Look at that. It's not even half because it's shallower, or it's, you know, less diameter down the bottom. So it's not even half. So just so you know, and that's another reason why sometimes food is not as flavorful as people expect. It's because you're not actually measuring properly. Okay, so that could hopefully help some of you guys. Okay, so some questions here, guys. Sharon, never made them, but always wanted to. Hello, Sharon. Good time. Good to see you. Good to see you. You love them. Good. Just watching because your chickpeas are still sprouting. Yes, and I so meant to post and remind everyone sooner, and I didn't. So thank you, Sharon. That's all right. Let them sprout. And Sam, if you use a food processor, does it matter what order you process the ingredients? Good question, Sam. Because we are doing this size of a batch, you should be all right with any food processor, unless you're using one of those little baby food processors, and then it would matter. In this case, we are going to mix it for a fair while, so it shouldn't make a difference, Sam. But that is a good question. That is also kind of why I put the recipe in that order. You could follow that order to be probably your best way to get this blended up. Okay, so yeah, that's a very valid question. Good job, Sam. And maybe in a regular food processor, you might need to scrape down the edges 1 or 2 times in between, okay? Because I am going to use the stick for this one as well. All right, so I believe we've got all of our ingredients in there. Everyone that is cooking with me, are you guys caught up? Okay, so this is pretty much, this is it. Like we're going to blend this up, we're going to put it into the frying pan, and then we can talk a little bit more about things you might serve this with, as well as how to actually get those sprouts happening. So let's just crank it up. We're probably going to go to maybe, I don't know, speed 7. Let's see how long we need to go. We're going to listen to the machine, okay, guys? And ultimately, that's more powerful than prescribing an amount. But I'll tell you right now how much of an amount of time. All right, let's check on those guys. So that was about 40 seconds. Let's see where we're at. Okay. All right. So we're probably gonna need 1 scrape down, and then we'll go again because we still have some fairly big pieces here. See, so we wanna reduce that down. We want a kind of a cohesive mixture, and we are starting to get the right texture though. So see how that's nice kind of sticky texture? That's what we're after, okay? So that's the right amount of moisture. Take note of that. That's the right amount of, you might be tempted at this point to want to add flour or something, but that's actually the right texture, and that's going to turn out to be a nice splat. But then don't forget that by the time it cools and you have it tomorrow, it's still going to be nice and moist, unlike the store-bought ones you guys brought up being quite dry. Okay, so that is the texture we're after. So let's give that a little scrape down. We'll go again, and then we'll get ready to have it in the frying pan. So if you are kind of caught up to me at this point, you might want to turn your frying pan on and get it hot now so that we're ready to splat. I'm going to get this running while I do that. Okay, air bubble. That's probably good. There we go, looks good. Okay, so that's the texture we're after. Okay, so it's still quite moist, yeah, but we're still gonna get the splat and the ball, like it's still sticky, it's gonna hold, which is what we're after, okay? That's kind of your checkpoint. So it's less about following a recipe blindly, it's more about knowing what we're looking for, and then you guys can adjust and adapt if anything kind of doesn't go to plan. All right, so come on back, let's make some splats. Now, trick here is to have a fairly well, heated pan in the beginning, but again, not a big deal. We're not trying to kind of really fry these. We're just trying to cook them on sort of a medium heat. But I like to get the pan up to heat first, especially when you're cooking with the good quality pans that are not non-stick, as in stainless or hybrid stainless and cast. I like to get them up to temperature first, then we add the oil so that we don't get the stickiness, okay? And then we can continue frying dry from there. So we do not need a lot of oil for these. That are not like a fritter, guys, okay? So you do not need to shallow fry them. It's gonna, make them that much healthier, that much easier on your belly to digest as well. But up to you what you wanna add. If we are gonna add a little bit of oil to the pan, which I will initially, even like half a teaspoon, maybe 1 teaspoon, should be plenty, okay, to keep us going. So I'm using a cooking coconut oil, not a virgin or extra virgin. Okay, and we've got some heat happening here. We're not quite there yet, but let's get these happening because I want to show you the shape that we're looking for. Okay, so we'll get that one on. And yeah, again, guys, I'm just using the 2 pans just for efficiency so we can get this on the table a bit faster, and to show you guys a little trick. In terms of saving time, I don't know about you, but I think time's just as valuable as money nowadays. Time is money, they say. So to invest in having a second good pan, a second big one, will save you more time, definitely more time, valuable time, than it's worth to get that extra pan. So I definitely recommend, leveraging that opportunity that you'll have. Okay, now the splat technique. So you can splat like a pro. You ready? Two spoons. So 2 dinner spoons, ideally 2 different sizes, but really doesn't matter. Okay, and with the bigger one, you're going to take your scoop. Try to start small. Okay, we don't need big splats. They're quite filling, quite dense. You can always go back for more. So get your first scoop, and then with the back of the second spoon, we're going to scrape it into the pan like that. Okay, and if you want the sound effects, then you'd go splat. Just kidding. Have fun with the kids on that one, okay? So little dollops, that's literally all we have to do. You don't need to worry about getting in there and balling them with your hands. You don't need to reshape them. They're not gonna spread out in the pan, so you can go fairly close. As long as we can still get in there and flip them, that's okay. And then I'll show you what we can do after if you want to, depending on what texture you like, we can get in there and sort of flatten them a little bit as well. So we'll just put them in. It's kind of like cookies. This is what I do for cookies as well, or AKA biscuits, how to get them onto the cookie sheet. It's pretty much that same texture that we're after. And some people ask me, do you even have to cook them? Well, no, you don't, as a matter of fact, because the beans that we used were already cooked, and in this case, because the peas that we used, as in the chickpeas, were sprouted, technically you don't have to cook this. So there's no raw egg in it. There's nothing in here that needs to be cooked. So if someone is doing a raw food diet, other than that tin of cooked beans, you wouldn't use that. You'd use extra sprouted chickpeas, and then you could stick these in the dehydrator instead and make raw sprouted falafels. Okay, so that's another option if you're doing a raw diet or a raw cleanse or something like that. Another option that you have. And yes, it'll have a different texture, but that's okay. It can be just as yummy in a different way. It might be a little bit kind of chewier rather than, well, yeah, probably same. Okay, so sometimes you might like to make little ones, bigger ones. You could even turn this into a veggie burger, guys. Okay, so you have lots of options. But you can see how much time this is going to save having the second pan, right? How are you guys going with it? Is anyone splatting? All right, so we've got them in the pan. Now, if we wanted, we could do a little flatten. So we still have quite a bit left there. So we could do a little flatten if we want to have more of like a mini burger patty kind of thing. Okay, now the trick here is going to be to watch the heat. So we want them to cook through without burning the bottoms. So I started on sort of heat 7 out of 9. I'm going to bring it down knowing that these burners get pretty hot here after time. So I'm probably going to bring that down to maybe 6, possibly even 5 once they really get going, because I don't want to burn the bottoms, but we want to kind of heat it through. Okay. And there we go. We'll make a little more patties. But completely up to you guys how you do that. They'll be easier to flip once they develop a bit of a kind of a crust on the bottom too. So in that case, patience. You've got your double pan. We're ready to at least serve 4 or 5 hungry mouths as soon as this lot's done. So, questions. Does this mixture keep in the fridge? Great question, Steph. Definitely. Okay, so I'd probably keep this up to 2 days in the fridge. Maybe you could go an extra day than that. Especially because we've got all that lemon in there. So maybe you could go 3 days in the fridge. That's a great thinking, Steph, because then you could take it out and do it fresh. They'll be nice and warm, nice and soft when you do them fresh. Otherwise, you do up your whole batch at once, and then when you go to serve it, if you have the luxury of kind of being home for that meal, then you could put them still in the frying pan like this, but bring it up to heat slowly with the lid on, little couple drops of water in the pan, and that kind of steam heat will heat them through and make them just as soft or just as nice as cooked fresh as well. Okay, that also works straight from frozen, guys. So normally I will do this, I will cook them all up and then I'll freeze. I try to be a good squirrel every time I cook. Something for me, something for the freezer. Okay, so be a good squirrel and put away your nuts for the winter so you can have some free time next week and keep that momentum going. So that's a great question, Steph. Yes, so any other questions on the splatting process, the cooking process, how they're going to be? If this is your first time, guys, I guess you don't really know what to expect, but let's have a little check on these here. We're probably not quite ready to go yet, but let's see, depending on how hot our pan was. We want to get under there. Okay. Yeah, so that's pretty close. So we haven't got burn, we just have a little bit of browning, which is good. Can't remember what order I splatted these in, but we'll just get in there. So the more these kind of cook down, the easier this will be to flip. So they're not maybe quite there yet. Probably need to give them a little bit longer. Okay, we probably want a bit more browning than that. Yeah, I'll let them go a little bit longer. Okay. All right, so how do we serve these? What do we have with them? Any ideas? What are you guys going to have with them tonight or whenever you cook them? Any plans? I kind of gave you a bit of a serving suggestion in the photo. That is one of many. So these things are some of the most versatile and highly nutritious snacks, especially for kids' lunchboxes, especially for office lunches, okay? So I was thinking about that tonight, as I usually do around this time if the meal is not completely included in the recipe. I was thinking to myself, how am I going to serve this for dinner tonight? So went and had a look in the fridge and don't feel like it has to be some specific recipe. So what I was able to find in the fridge is some fresh spinach, some already cut up, kind of finely shredded sort of stir-fry veggies. So I'm going to have that. I'll probably even boil some green beans, steam some green beans because I got heaps of them. And I'll just pull together a bit of a meal. We might have a little bit of sauerkraut on the side and maybe an avocado. Okay. In the photo, you probably saw a bit of a red dip that I made with it. And that was the same process when I made these around the photo time. I kind of went, oh, right, what am I going to serve it with? So I happened to have a roasted capsicum that was actually still in the oven at that time. So I chucked the roasted capsicum into the food processor. I think I added some cashews and I added some tomato paste and I just built it from there. I can't remember, there was another main ingredient in there. I can't remember what it was now. So moral of that story is it's pretty flexible. You can kind of go with the flow. And if you hear me say that and you go, right, yeah, no idea, then maybe you need to do some more of these cook with me's or a bit more training so that it can be less stressful and just as easy to pull something together, okay? That is the ultimate goal. All right, so let's flip the rest of these guys and then we're gonna move on to talking about sprouting because that is a pretty cool thing to know how to do. So the ones in the middle of this pan always get a bit hotter here. There we go. Usually your second batch will be even easier to flip. They kind of like fall off the pan, which is cool. Okay, this guy might not quite have been as hot. Maybe it was. There we go. So some little splats, and hopefully not as dry as the ones you guys have maybe had in the past. Also, because they're sold in a store, they probably have to reduce the moisture content so that they do last on the shelf a bit better too. So that can help make them a bit drier for sure. All right, so let's let those keep going a little bit slower here. And let's go back and talk about how we actually get these sprouts in the first place. Now, I'm curious, those of you that are with me live tonight, how many of you have already made your own sprouts, whether you're preparing it for this or even before that? One of the most common things to sprout would be mung beans. Okay, so maybe if you're just starting out for the very first time, either mung beans or these chickpeas, good place to start. Nice and big, not tending to kind of mold or anything like that, so it's a good starting place. So what you need is they're normally called nut milk bags, okay? But I also call them, well, sometimes they're also listed as a sprouting bag. So it is, I believe it's some form of nylon, something like that. But because of that, especially if you're making nut milk, it's really important. These are really good bags because you're gonna put a lot of pressure on it when you're squeezing the nut milk. So it's good that it doesn't bust open on you. I have tried the cloth bags in the past that you get like when you buy a sack of oats or something like that, you get the cloth bags and they just take about 5 times longer because the holes are so fine. So, and then for sprouting, they're not as good because there's not as much airflow. So I do recommend getting 1 or 2 of these, having them on hand at all times. You might even designate 1 for nut milk and 1 for sprouting. Okay, so you get your bag for sprouting, you get your dried, whatever you're sprouting. In this case, you just take your sort of half cup, 1.5 cups, whichever, put it into the bag. Obviously do as much or as little as you like. The size of the bag that you saw initially, keep in mind, that was only 2 cups of dried beans. So they do expand a lot. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Maybe less is more the first time you do it. So you take your beans and you're gonna put them in a bowl of fresh water. When I say fresh water, I generally mean filtered. So clean water, because they're going to absorb that into them, okay? So let it soak in water overnight, about 8 to 12 hours. You can go a bit longer, you can go kind of up to 24, but at least 8 hours, okay? So you let them soak, you let them absorb. They're going to absorb a lot, so give them quite a bit of water. You'll be surprised, but after you do it once, you'll know, okay? And then once they've soaked for their time, you're going to just take them and suspend them over you throw out that rinse water and then suspend them somewhere where they can drip dry, okay? And then 2 or 3 times every day after that, you'd fill this up with fresh water again, and you just bring the bowl of fresh water back up to them, give them a little soak, a little swish of water, and then let them drip dry. So ideally, if they're hanging there on your bench, you'll see them as you're in the kitchen, and you'll think sort of 2 or 3 times a day to go in and give them a little dunk, a little rinse, and let them keep sprouting. And that's it, guys. That's how they do it. So within a day, well, pretty much even sometimes as soon as after you finish soaking them, they'll start to show a little sign that little tail is starting to come out. And at least after a day, you'll get tails. So it's pretty cool and it's pretty magical for kids to get to watch. I highly recommend you give this experience to kids and get them involved. Depending on your child, if you don't think they're really going to go for it, then I would probably recommend you actually kind of play dumb about the whole process and get them to really discover it kind of on their own. Help them have this discovery process so that they kind of feel like they're doing this themselves. It's quite an empowering thing. And then when a child sees that you've got a new plant, that's even more magical. Okay, so that's it. So 2 days, as soon as you get those little tails, probably after 2 days, I would recommend you actually take them out, not out of the bag, sorry. You stop the sprouting process by just putting them into the fridge. But I would put them in the fridge in a container in this bag so that if they're still in there, if you haven't eaten them up within sort of 2 or 3 days, then rinse them every 3 or 4 days. take the bag out of the fridge, give them a good rinse, maybe let it dry for an hour or so, put it back in the fridge. And if you keep rinsing them every 3 or 4 days, they should last a good couple of weeks, okay? Because it's a living plant now. So that's how you keep them a bit longer in the fridge. And yes, good point, Steph. It's a great homeschooling activity, science and home ec. Love it, totally. Talk about a great lesson that every child should have at a young age is how to create a baby plant. And what you could do as an experiment now, after they've tasted one and kind of had a little chew and had a little discussion about it, is then plant one and see if you can get it like a plant, see if you can get the green leaves to form, see if you can get them to learn how to take care of a baby plant. Okay, so I can't emphasize enough how cool it is when you start to understand nature and its wonder. That's all there is to it, guys. That's all there is to sprouting. So hopefully you have no excuses. All you have to do is go and get a little bit set up, as in a nut milk bag and a couple of dried beans. The one thing I will say though is that the dried beans need to be organic, unless you've you know that they're from an Australian source, simply because when they come across the border, if they're not certified organic, they are likely going to be irradiated because they are technically still a viable seed, right? So unless it's Australian grown, I would definitely go certified organic so that you do not have irradiated seeds. Otherwise you won't get sprouts. They will be inert, they will be dead. You won't get this magical process happening. So that's a big FYI. I probably should have said at the beginning. You got to go organic so that they're not basically killed, ruined. All right. Okay, so let's finish off these falafels. I'm basically just going to put them on a plate because I'm not going to show you guys, I guess, all the other steps to my random meal tonight. But we'll put them all together and set up here for dinner. Now this is smelling quite done. Okay, especially in the middle of this pan. Let me put this down. Okay, and I'll probably just break one apart here for you so you can see it. It'll be a bit hot here. But so the texture is still quite nice and quite, I don't know, I guess kind of like a veggie burger. It's going to be a bit soft while it's still hot, but as this cools, it'll firm up and it'll be more like, I don't know how to describe that. It won't be as dry as a regular falafel, that's for sure. But it will firm up as it cools. So just heads up, if you like it firmer, just wait a little bit till they cool down. Cool, guys? I hope you have a really great first experience with your falafels, and share your photos. Would love to see them. And also would love to hear what you end up enjoying them with, okay? Because also for, kids' lunch boxes and things like that, it can be a very nutritious and easy to grab snack, especially if you're going to go pick up the kids after school and you know that you're not allowed to pick them up empty-handed, as in they demand that you bring food with them. Bring some Splats and dip. Make a ranch dip, make a pesto, make a hummus, make something, and let them snack on that. And if they're not actually hungry, then they, they'll want it if they're hungry, put it that way. It's all what you guys make available. So thank you so much, very much for cooking with me live. Would love to have your guys' comments, your feedback, and also your ideas for any future recipes that you're still hanging out for. So always happy to hear about that. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time on Cook With Me Live. Good night.